grew up with 10 people living in a 3-bedroom trailer. We didn't have a lot of food to eat at times. We'd have to eat mayonnaise sandwiches, syrup sandwiches. All these parts and stuff, my uncles, we used to all look through this to try to sell and try to make money. We didn't have a lot of conveniences because we lived outside of the city limits. And I think that here is where my heart for community started. And it was just in the simple sense of all of us working together, growing together, living together, and doing all the work that was required. And I think that as I evolved to more financial sufficiency, I think that it was easier for me to look back and have a passion for other people who were in those same conditions to say, you know what, how can I be a part of building a better and stronger community around people, and maybe they can make the leap that I was able to make. We play football. I mean, it looks small now, but when you was a kid, it was big. It was on the sports field, on the football field itself, that the racial barriers were dropped, because I lived in the segregated South. You know, in high school, I was playing football, and I was heavily recruited. You know, I was one of the top recruits in the state of Texas. I could have went to any Division I college that I wanted to go to.
Damon Dunn at the 10.
And so I chose to go to Stanford University because I felt like it gave me the best opportunity to be successful. Even if football didn't work out, it was the best choice, you know, that I've ever made in my life. And I was surrounded by kids that wanted to be senators and Supreme Court justices and President of the United States, and it caused my ambition to grow. And that was one of the single most important lessons I learned at Stanford. Whatever it is that you can conceive, if you're willing to work hard enough, you can achieve it.
Looking at him, it kind of sets the expectation, or it breaks through a lot of the stereotypes that, you know, African American or Hispanic students are not able to go on to college, and he was able to break that.
When he rolled out of the NFL and he was ready to start his business career, his idea of starting was not going to work for somebody else. It was starting his own company, and they started basically from scratch.
When I was 12 years old, I was a class clown, and one day my teacher had enough of it, and she put me out of the classroom. And I remember sitting in the hallway, and a janitor walked by, and he told me, he said, "Look into that classroom." I looked in there, and he said, "Well, what do you see?" And I didn't say anything because I was embarrassed. And he said, "What I see in there are a bunch of kids learning how to be your boss." And that hit me so deep to my core. At that point, I started to start setting higher expectations for myself. I said, I'm never going to get kicked out of the classroom again. I said, I'm going to start making good grades because I'm not going to let anybody else be my boss.
They went out and did it, and they did it across several states in a big way with major corporations, and built up a successful empire that it'd be impressive for anybody in their entire life to have a career that successful, and to do it at his age in that amount of time frame is almost unheard of in the industry that we're in.
Today I want to talk to you about finishing the race.
Damon's first sermon was "Finish the Race," and it really goes with him, because anything Damon starts, he's gonna finish.
Anyone who would take the time, coming from California, to come and inspire kids, to me, that's amazing.
He's always been taught to give. The more you give, the more you receive. And so Damon has always been a giver, and that's one of the qualities that I admire in him, because he blesses others. And we often talk about, you can feed a man for a day, but if you teach him how to fish, you feed him for life. And so that is a quality that he instills in everyone around him.
If one person is suffering in my community, if one person is dealing with an injustice in my community, if one person is dealing with education challenges, then that diminishes me. And I am inextricably woven together with their sense of purpose and their destiny. And so I feel compelled, I feel obligated to go help and to go share. My only regret is I don't have a full hour to share these things with you. We're going to take the next step from inspiration and motivation to real strategic thinking. I was watching these two up on the stage, and I was thinking to myself, there's a huge disconnect at times between the information they're giving you and your ability to be able to receive it, because they think on a strategic level, and you really haven't learned how to do that yet, how to be entrepreneurs, how to get to the position where they are. I do want to address two questions that came out of the audience from that last one. Someone asked the question, what's important for an entrepreneur to know? I built two companies. The most important thing you need to know, whoever that person was, you got to understand underwriting. If you don't understand how a bank or a private equity or any debt source is going to value what you're doing, you're never going to be able to build a company into a position to where you can get the access to capital that you need. So underwriting is the critical, most important part. Yeah, you need the long-term plan, as Diane laid out, and yeah, you need to start building backwards and looking at 3-month steps. But if you don't have that plan tied to how equity or debt is going to underwrite it, you're never going to be successful. That's critical. There was another question at the end that I heard. If I think of it again, I'll come back to it. So let's take the next step. Mark, 30 minutes? Sure. All right, perfect. So I've jumped classes. One day I want to write this book. I grew up incredibly poor, and then I'm jumping socioeconomic classes, right? I grew up, and what a win looks like where I grew up in the hood was like, and I'm not saying this to be funny, I'm really saying this to be legitimate. It's, if you had a job that had benefits, if you were the good kid, you weren't involved in a lot of trouble. If you got an education, maybe you went to community college. If you had swag, if you had nice city shoes, like there are things there's jargon. Hey, what's up, dog? Hey, shit, that's what's up. Hey, for real though. Hey, you good? Hey, I'm good. Like there's a whole jargon that people use in different socioeconomic classes. And that's the class that I kind of grew up in. Here's the jargon. Here's what a win looks like. And then you jump up, right? I go up to Stanford University, and now you're on campus at Stanford, and you're finding out that facts matter, right? You start thinking of being around students that have ideas of owning companies and building their own companies, or joining, becoming doctors, or going on to have incredible careers. And all of you've done that. We all leave high school, we go out to college, and we got to go make a life for ourselves, whether that's finding a wife and building a career, and owning a home, building up some children, and then having an opportunity to hopefully retire, leaving behind some type of inheritance. So we're all trying to accomplish that. I've jumped a few times, and I want to talk about today what you need to learn as you jump socioeconomic classes. So I'm going to meet you where you are, and you're way behind where they are. So I'm going to meet you where you are and let you understand how I made the jumps and the things that I learned as I moved up to certain jumps. So you're going out to make this life. As you go out to make this life, you're trying to figure out what kind of job am I going to have. And what I want to tell you about the job that you want, the career that you're going to have, you need a plan. You're only as good as your plan. You have to have a legitimate plan, and you can't learn enough from your own life to build this plan, which means you need to read books on people that you are in industries that you want to be in. You should be watching YouTube videos on those people and people that are in those industries. You should be jotting down, how did they get there? What schools did they go to? Who did they contact? Where did they get their access to capital? Did they get debt? Did they get equity? Which pieces can you start to reel together? Understand their strategic thinking, their narrative on what they were trying to accomplish. And you start to get pieces of this story, of multiple people's stories, and then you start building it together and pulling it together from different tapestries, and you start to say, you know what, I've got enough threads for what my plan is going to be because I've taken and learned from all these other groups. Does that make sense? All right. Number one, I'll give you a story about me starting a real estate development firm. We wanted to be real estate developers right out of Stanford. I went to the NFL, played 5 years, got out, and then my college roommate, his father was in real estate development. Never heard of real estate development. I went to Stanford, and I still didn't understand what real estate development was. I was a public policy major. We looked at what development was, but I still didn't understand how do you underwrite it? How do you look at a piece of land, figure out what can be built on it? How do I finance it? And then how do I know if I can make a profit at the end of the day? Like those are the real pieces. How do we underwrite this? How do I make money? So we wanted to get into the business, and we had a significant challenge. We didn't have any tenants because we wanted to be retail developers that wanted to work with us. We thought that we would go work for Walgreens because they were growing like crazy. This was back in 1999, 2000. So it was about 2001, 2002 is when I started that company with my buddy. And we wanted to work with Walgreens, but Walgreens already had enough developers in every territory where they were developing. So we wanted to develop for them in North Carolina. And we found out that the young lady that was the real estate manager for North Carolina, she already had 6 preferred developers that she would give proprietary information to and say, we need 25 sites. Here are the regions within the city where we need to be located. And she's given that proactively to people that she trusts, people that she's worked with over a long period of time, people that she has relationships with, people who have actually produced deals and gotten them done for her on time and on budget, or on time and under budget. So we couldn't find a way to break through. And my business partner, his father had given us access to $1 million of capital. He didn't just give it all to us. We had a little bit for salary, a little bit for office admin. We had dead deal money. If we needed to chase deals, we could put earnest money up. We had access to it, and he would give it to us as we needed. And he said, I'll give you access to it for 1 year. And if you can't do a deal, then that's pretty much the end of the company. I'm going to go to law school or something like that. So he gave us a year. We're down to the 10th month and we don't have a deal. And we tried everything that we knew. Then we went down to the basement and we said, we got to start rethinking strategies here. What can we do to get Walgreens to want to work with us? So we just started playing off of each other. It really was not talking to some expert and giving us the right idea. We learned enough throughout the process of our first 10 months to figure out, okay, what is this young lady's job? Her job is to go out into Charlotte, North Carolina, and to figure out, how to build 4 to 5 Walgreens a year. And I'm sure she's got maps of where she wants to be at. I'm sure those maps have what color the competitors are on there and what intersections they kind of want to be at. And there's demographic information. What's the population around 1 mile? There's zoning information on actual sites. Is it zoned appropriately to be able to build what you want to build on it? And she's got this whole map for what they want to do in Charlotte, but she doesn't have access to all the sites. So what we decided to do is, why don't we do her job for her? Our best chance to get her to work with us is to do all the work that she has to do over the next 5 years in the next month. How do we do this? How do we break down the market? So we started talking to his father. His father was a real estate developer. We started to figure out what Walgreens trade areas looked like, a 2-mile radius, how far they were built from each other. We started to figure out they want to be on the going home side of the road. So if you look at downtown is up here and you're coming home down this way, that means the west side of the road is the going home side of the road. So we started to learn all these different things. So what we did, we put together this presentation. We went to Charlotte. We drove every single road in Charlotte. We took out a map and we circled every intersection. We drove it. At every single intersection, we looked and said, okay, what's here? And we would determine, is that something old that we can buy, that we can knock down? No. Is there a vacant sign up here? No. So we'd find something that was old. That's called an assemblage. And we would go back and look at the Secretary of State's page to find out on the property tax who the owner on record was. And we found about 122 sites across 25 trade areas. And then we whittled that down to our top 75. And on every one of those sites, what we decided to do was all the work that Walgreens would do. We found out that they they use a demographics program called Claritas, which just gives them the 1 mile, 3 mile, 5 mile, all the demographic information, income, ethnicities, age, all that stuff. And so we bought the Claritas program so that when they look at the data that we're presenting to them, it's in their same language and then they could trust it and we let them know it's Claritas. We took our top 75 sites across our top 25 trade areas, whittled that down further to about the top 30 sites in each of these trade areas. And then we put together site sheets on each one. We've got the demographic information. We found out the color dots that Walgreens uses on their map for competition and for themselves. And we found out that we could walk a lot of these sites and fly in a contractor who was doing Walgreens in West Virginia. And then he would walk the sites with us to figure out what kind of site work and what kind of off-site work. So we'd have budgets on each one of these sites that we were putting together. In addition to those budgets, we also had all of the zoning information. So we said, you know what? It's zoned residential today. What is the process to get through the city planning department to get it zoned to commercial? And what's the likelihood to do that? And then you call the city planner, you find out, to do a rezone, you may need to make an amendment to a general plan. You may have to go through a city council process. It may just be administrative, that if it's a use that the city will like to see at this intersection, they'll let you do it. So we'd have all the timeline for all the top 30 sites that we had. And we put all this information together and we went to a convention called the International Council of Shopping Centers. And most people go to that convention and they talk to tenants, and this is where all the national tenants go. Everybody goes there. It's in Vegas, and they all have booths set up. And you go in there, you ask to meet with the person that's in the region, that's the real estate person. Developers go in and say, look, I got this nice site. Would you like to do a deal on this site? Can we talk about it further after the convention when you get back into your office? And that's what everyone typically does. We went and said, we want to speak with Miss Sarita Hill, that was her name. And we want to set up a 10-minute meeting while she's here. They would do 10 to 15-minute meetings. And we went into the room and we said, listen, here's a book. In this packet is every single site in Charlotte, North Carolina, they had no stores at the time, that Walgreens can develop on. We've talked to all the owners. We know what's likely to be sold. We know what the prices are. We've already looked at what the zoning is. We already know what the development timelines would be and what it would take to be zoned appropriately for a drive-through retail location for a Walgreens. We flew in a contractor that you guys approved that was in West Virginia to walk over these sites with us. So the budgets that we put in here are real budgets based on what the off-site work is going to be. The building cost is easy. It's the same everywhere. It's the off-site work, stuff that happens on the site that's the greatest risk to the budget that you're putting together. And we said, here's all of these deals. You can take all of these and give them to the guys you're already working with. Just give us 2 deals. That was an effective presentation. They decided to give us 2 deals, and she took our other deals, and she did give them to the other guys, and those guys made millions of dollars off of the sites that we gave them, which I don't mind because I was able to make money on the 2 Walgreens deals, and there started our relationship with Walgreens. So now I'm inside with Walgreens, and we're doing deals with them, and she ends up getting moved to Florida, so then we end up going to Florida with her, and then she gets Northern California. So we ended up doing about 12 deals, making about $15 million on those deals. But the strategic thinking is what I'm really trying to impress upon you. The ability to go down into that basement and to think about, how do I get this person to want to do business with us? This is what entrepreneurs do. This is what people do when you go in for an interview for a job. You have to understand, what are they looking for? What looks like a win to them? What is the jargon? And if you don't know that yourself, you don't have a plan, you have to read other people who've been in these positions. You got to Google it and research it and go have meetings with people and write out what you think differentiates your value to this organization or that you're starting this business. That's the level of strategic thinking that they weren't talking about today, that they do on a normal basis. It's their normal conversation because they are executives at senior companies and they're only speaking at a strategic level. Most of us are going to be workers probably in here. They're going to go get a job with a good wage and work at that job for a long time. If you ever want to make a whole bunch of money and become the person who takes the risk, then you will have people who are afraid to take risks that work with you. That's something to know. People who are afraid to take risks work for others that do take that same risk. So strategic thinking, that's what I'm trying to get over. You have to have a plan. That's story number 1. Story number 2. So I went through a real estate development career. 2008, the market crashed. We made a lot of money. I took basically a retirement for 7 years, 32 to about 39 years old. And then I decided to go back to work. I had a lot of stuff in between that I won't talk about now because it's not relevant to this discussion. But I made a lot of progress with my network and my contacts, and it actually led to this opportunity I'm going to tell you about now. So real estate developer, that was my entire career. I run for 2 political offices. I lose, spend a bunch of money. I'm going to go back to work in 2015. I decided to go back to work, and I said, you know what? I met 5 billionaires on the campus of Stanford University, not on the campus of Stanford, but through my Stanford network, through Stanford alumni. I'm going to go meet with all these people, and I'm going to try to get them to give me a job. And seriously, and I'm thinking, you know what? I'm valuable. I'm going to go in and tell them my story. I've made a few $1 million, in doing real estate development. I've been able to take the last 7 years off. I'm looking for an opportunity now. You're someone that I admire. You're doing the things that I want to do. You're living the lifestyle one day that I hope that I can live. I respect you a lot. I was wondering if you can give me some direction on where you think someone my age with my resources, with the skill sets that I have, would make an impact. Talked to all 5. 3 of them offered me a job. Incidentally, one of the people that offered me a job told me that if this group here offers you a job, forget the rest of us. You should take a job from these 2 guys. Those guys are Brad Freeman and Ron Spogley, and I took the job. Now the question is going to be, how did I get this job? And that's what I want to talk about today, as I've got dry mouth apparently. I go into this meeting with these guys, and I give them the whole spiel that I just gave to you. And they're like, you know what? We're thinking about hiring someone in our family office. A family office is if you're really wealthy, you've got $700 million that you have to go out and invest. You're not just going to go put it all in a couple of stocks or put it in your money market account. You're going to build this family office where they're investment professionals and they have different agendas for each bucket and each vertical that they're in, from venture capital to private equity to real estate to, your traditional assets, stocks and bonds, et cetera. And they've got a plan for what they want to do. They were looking to hire someone in private equity in the family office. I have no private equity experience, 0. And so I'm thinking, okay, damn, how am I going to get this job? All these guys are talking. They're talking to people in their big company. They own this large company called Freeman Spogley. They're talking to people in that company. They're interviewing them. They're interviewing other experienced private equity people that are in different family offices. And I'm the only guy coming in late with no private equity experience. So I had to go home and I had to get a plan. I have to figure out a way that I can differentiate my value to them to make them say yes to me and no to the other guys. And private equity is you're going and making equity investments and debt investments in companies buying a minority or a majority share. And if you buy a majority share, now you're planning all the growth and you're working with these management teams to be able to put together those growth plans, whether they're going to do vertical growth, where they go by under them the producing and manufacturing all the way out to the sales chain, et cetera. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't know all this P&Ls and income statements and balance sheets. I know what they are, but I don't know how to look at them and understand, what are these earnings strong? Are they weak? Are the sales something you'd be interested in? Do we understand if there's recurring revenue? Like all the things I've had to learn now, I didn't know all these things. And I'm trying to articulate them to you in a way which right now you can understand where I was at then. So I'm not giving you the real language yet. We'll get there once I tell you how I got the job. But I'm there speaking in incomplete phrases and thoughts because I'm not a private equity guy. So this is what I thought. These guys don't need a private equity guy. You know private equity. Anybody you hire, they're going to be inferior to you. You can look at a P&L, income statement, and a balance sheet right away and know the strength of this company. So why bring in a person that's junior to you to duplicate the exact same skill sets that you guys have? What you really need is an operator, someone who knows how to go out to these businesses that you're contemplating making an investment in and understand, because when you buy a business, you're just buying a group of people that are making some level of profit. And there's different groups of people that are doing different things, and they're all trying to make a profit, whether you're in finance or whether you're in retail. It doesn't matter what you're in. It's just a group of people that are driving some profit level. And the question that you have to answer if you're going to invest in this group of people, can they keep making the profit that they're making? Can they grow that profit base? Do they have the right acumen, intelligence, and skill sets to be able to get there? Do they have the right ideas? Is this something, a proposition that we should invest in based upon the execution of the people that are there? That's what I sold to them. You need someone who's going to go to these sites because you're never going to go. These are companies that probably worth 25, 30 million. These guys are buying companies that are worth 400, 500 million. You're never going to go. Brad and Ron are never going to go sit in this office and talk to this guy that's running a payroll outsourcing company, or talk to some guy who owns 30 Dunkin' Donut stores and we're going to buy that company for 15 million. You're never going to go there. You need someone who can go there and understand if these are good operators or bad operators. You bring me in and I'll show up early, I'll stay late. Nobody will outwork me. I will get you the results that you need. I'll learn the things that I need to learn faster, quicker, and I'll be better than the people that you're interviewing after about 6 months. So bring me in. I'll make sure that you never invest in a deal where the people are not good and they won't execute. And they hired me. I differentiated my value proposition. I went in behind. I went in with less experience, but I put together a plan. I understood how to position myself to them because I understood what a win looked like, because I put my plan together. I knew this would make an impression on them. They knew that they were never going to go to these companies. And do you want a private equity guy who can look at a bunch of spreadsheets and see, God, look at this P&L and look at the growth of the EBITDA over the last 5 years and what's the compound annual growth rate? Do you really want a guy that can just point all this out? Because that's what these guys are. Or do you want someone like me who built a company to a $163 million company with a $1 million investment that almost didn't work because it took me 10 months to get my first deal. I was 2 months to almost having the success in business that I've had. Differentiating your value proposition. Does that make sense? Okay. Third story. I want to tell you 60 minutes. Okay. By the way, I figured out what the other question was. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Someone said about what can we in the Midwest. So where's the guy that asked the question about the Midwest? You asked the question, how do we do in the Midwest? What makes the United States special? This answers your question, and I'm taking a sidebar here. I apologize. What makes the United States special, and people talk about us in relationship to China, is that we have these ecosystems. And these ecosystems like Silicon Valley, from venture capital and angel capital, and you've got conventional finance, and you've got private equity, you've got investment banking, you've got all the research universities, you got the subsidiary technology companies, you have the human capital that are here, you have access to all these things, this ecosystem. You see that in Research Triangle, you see that, in different parts, Chicago, Boston, New York. Those ecosystems is what differentiate us. That's what allows us to carry 5 books in our hands like this, to developing a backpack and putting 20 books on our back, to developing an iPad and being able to put 1,000 books into this piece of technology. And we get through that iteration more efficiently and quicker than anyone else in the world. You look at it, 330 million people, that's our population here, generating $17 trillion of GDP. And you've got 1.3 billion people in China generating, depends on how you look at it, $10 to $12 million of GDP. That means 5 times fewer people are generating almost 1.5 times more productivity in what they're producing. It's because we're the most productive people in the world. It's because we have the highest labor skill base in the world. It's because we have these unique ecosystems where we can take advantage of ideas and put them in the hopper and go all the way from angel money out to the distribution and retail outlets. And we have those little ecosystems. If you want to have entrepreneurship in the Midwest, you have to start thinking about how to invest in these, what are the existing ecosystems, and how do we invest to build more of these ecosystems. And one day, that's something that I want to talk about personally as I think about running for president one day. So that's what we're going to talk about now. Last story. Damon Dunn wants to run for president. Rule number 1 is never tell people you want to run for president if you want to run for president, because then people say, this guy is out here, he's just being opportunistic. But I don't care. So I'm thinking, how can a guy like me, with my story, legitimately run for president? I got to have a plan. I don't have no plan. how do I put this plan together? Why don't I start reading about all the presidents in the United States and read biographies on all these guys? How did they position themselves? Where were they? And I started getting some key elements from that. You got to build some credibility. I saw Abraham Lincoln. I read his biography, and Abraham Lincoln's story was really dynamic. He was a Whig. He became a Republican. It was a new party back in 1854, and won't tell you how those parties differentiate. But what he did, he ran for a U.S. Senate. He ran one term in the House of Representatives. Then he decides to run for the U.S. Senate, 1858, Stephen Douglas. They have the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And you're going through all those debates. He loses the election in 1858 to Stephen Douglas. But this is what he does. That loss was a strategic loss. He was able to use something from those debates. He took all of the debate transcripts, and he took all of the transcripts of his speeches. And back then, in the Republican Party, they dictated who would be the candidate would be through the delegates. So it wasn't a popular vote out to the people, it was to the delegates. So he took his binded transcripts of the debates, and he took the speeches that he had given, and he sent them to all the Republican delegates, and he was the only person that got them critical information to differentiate who he was and what his thoughts on slavery were. That was the big deal. And his thought differentiated from the current guy, which is Buchanan, who was the president. Buchanan wanted slavery in the South, slavery everywhere. Then Stephen Douglas also ran for president, and his differentiation was slavery in the South, because nobody wanted to go to civil war. And then in new territories like Nebraska, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, Missouri, why don't we let those new territories decide by popular vote? They called it popular sovereignty, if there would be slavery or not. And then Abraham Lincoln's position was slavery in the South. He was fine with slavery in the South, no civil war. He did not want slavery in new territories or in the North. So that was his small differentiation. He wanted everyone to know that. And they thought that they could win the presidency if he made that. So I took that idea. The guy has his transcripts. And I said, you know what? Why don't I become a Hoover Fellow? So I'm 30-something years old. They call Hoover. I had a little bit of reputation, and thank goodness I knew some of the people that were there. They let me into Hoover for 3 years. Now I'm at the Pacific Research Institute. I write 2 op-eds for them. I just finished a brief on socialism, how my life story contrasts against socialism. And I'm finishing a book on that at the end of the month. And we filmed a documentary on my life story, went out and raised $150,000 for this documentary. And the documentary uses my life to contrast against socialism. Why did I choose socialism to be the backdrop? Because if I want to run for president one day, I've got to lift my political profile. And if I make myself relevant on issues that people are discussing, spoiler alert, I'm a Republican, so I apologize to everybody in the room. That's not well received everywhere, but I am. I made a lot of money, so I want to save some of it. Y'all better check these Republicans out, man. These guys told me how to make some money. I'm good. Trust me, I mean that. I'm not joking. So I'm like, I got to lift my political profile, right? I'm on it. I still got 9 minutes, Mark. So I got to lift my political profile, and I'm thinking I need to be relevant on issues. And the Republicans in the 2020 convention, that week-long convention, someone's going to have to address the left's issues on all of the socialist policies that are coming with that agenda. And I'm not arguing whether they're good or bad here. This is not a political discussion. It's about the strategic thinking. So let's not get into a policy debate. But someone has to address that low income, the wage gap, lack of socioeconomic mobility, the people that are feeling stuck. The middle class is kind of dwindling. Like, someone in the Republican Party has to address it. Why don't I brand myself as the guy that can best address this? I grew up poor, living in a trailer. My mom had me at 16. My father was killed when I was 3. How do I do? I lost 3 friends to murder by the time I was 16 years old. I wasn't supposed to make it. Can I use my story of getting an education, becoming an entrepreneur, and talking about why that's important, and making myself the perfect person with this documentary, with this book, and with the brief that I just read, to be able to address that if we can get in front of the right people? So that's part of the plan. I got all of these different ideas by reading about different presidents and different candidates and what allowed them to succeed, and what were the turning points on why they failed. And so that's where we are in the process right now. I'm literally living out this plan that we put together, and we have ways that we know what we're going to try to do. There's nobody on TV like me, particularly from the right, that can address these issues. And just the spoiler on why I'm the perfect person to address it, I believe in the safety net like everyone else. Everyone that my grandparents were poor, so we didn't have food stamps and government cheese and free lunch and all the different welfare programs that we were on. We probably wouldn't have made it. We needed it. But I also saw the bad side of it, which is my grandmother quit her job because at the end of the day, if she had too much household income, we would have lost our eligibility to all that free lunch. And there were 7 of us. And it would take tens of thousands of dollars to make up the programs that we were getting, having a benefit from, just to replace it, versus $1 you go over, you're no longer eligible. You have too much household income. So there was incentive, man, to be poor and to be enslaved to these dependent policies. And then I'm cool with my grandparents going through that because they needed it. They didn't have college education. But then my uncles got it. And then that messed with me. I was like, now you've passed down poverty, right? So this whole war on poverty thing isn't working. Is anybody moving out of poverty? They don't even talk about it being a way out of poverty anymore. Now it's like income assistance. And what's really happening is that people are getting trapped. They're getting enslaved. If you're a single mom, you got 3 kids, you may not even want to get married because if the husband moves in and you have too much household income, now you're going to lose your housing subsistence program. You're going to lose your kids' free lunch program. I mean, there's just so much negative pressure to not be married, so much negative pressure to stay poor, and you inherit it and pass it down. And I had to go figure out how to get out. And for me, it was through an education. Everyone who has a job that does not live in poverty, you have some type of job, some type of skill, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a doctor, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you are a trades guy, whether you're a contractor, a plumber, certified nursing aide, radiology technician, success and movement out of poverty comes down to some type of skill set, whether you get out of that, whether you get from that a college education or whether you get some type of certified, vocation, et cetera. So that's the strategic thinking. I'm telling you, these are the kinds of ways you have to think about things. Questions? I have 2 stories left, but I'll take questions if you guys have them. No questions? Okay, please.
Seems like you do a ton of research. I don't know how many questions. How did you narrow it down to what you thought was most specific for you and your situation?
So first I start off with every president after 1900, right? So I'm like, okay, you got Teddy Roosevelt. I'm like, all right, what's about him? So I wanted to read about everybody from there on. I wanted to focus on everybody post-World War II. The world's a completely different world after World War II. World War I was a big impact, but the world didn't change much. But now you've set up basically the Western Alliance, and you have the Soviet Union, and you have socialism, and then they crash in '89. And so that whole post-World War II and post-Cold War period is the most important things that you have to really understand, because the things that happened pre-World War II, they're not necessarily as impacting the overall global landscape. And so that's kind of how I prioritize. And then I wanted to pick selective presidents in the 1800s. We had a lot of one-term presidents. So James Madison, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson. There's a guy named Thomas Paine that I love. I think that's going to be my new moniker. I'm Thomas Paine of this generation.
You mentioned getting your education, kind of moving out of poverty, kind of changing between those socioeconomic classes.
Yep.
How do you kind of stay true to your roots while still moving across and stay relatable on these different levels?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Everybody does it differently. There's no right answer to that. I think that as long as you are, have the mindset of what you have, is that you're sensitive to making sure you maintain those roots, then I think you'll do it. So for me, it's going back. I opened an academy called Long Beach College Prep Academy. We send 50 kids to college every single year. It's giving back for me. It's how I keep my connection, there. But at the same time, I'm learning new things and I'm growing. And I find that I'm happiest in my life when I'm growing, when I'm challenging myself, when I'm putting together the game plan, when I'm starting to attack and achieve it. Does that help? Okay.
What were your biggest challenges running as, first of all, Republican, and second of all, Republican in California?
So it was being a Republican in California. I ran for mayor of Long Beach, and the Republican demonstration was 13%. But I thought strategically, where I'm putting my strategic plan together, that if I run for mayor, and for me it was learning. It was about doing retail politics. I didn't run it necessarily just to win. I did it so that I could understand the game and know it would come back to me. And I'm running, and everyone there knows I'm a Republican. So the question is, how do I win people? Right? It's all Democrats, basically. They're 85% Democrats in Long Beach. And I felt that I had to find this golden thread of the things I lived in my life, so things in poverty, how I was able to move through those things, and then how I can connect those things to policies that I wanted to advance. And then nobody could really then, if I focus on policies, nobody really then could undermine the things that I've lived. I didn't like read about this on TV or in a book. I didn't watch, getting out of poverty on a documentary. Like, I did it. I actually ate mayonnaise sandwiches, and then I made millions of dollars. And so I know what it takes. I'm not getting it secondhand information. I'm not somebody spouting out a whole bunch of policy ideas that don't work. I did it. right? I lived that life. My mom left me with my grandparents, for the first 12 years of my life. My father was killed. I didn't have a dad. I literally lived in this environment in that trailer. And so I had a lot of credibility because ultimately, no matter who I ended up debating or talking about, I put it policy centered. What do we need? I talked about the things that we need, where we are, and how do we get working class people to be in where they need to be. And my ideas were so good. They were so compelling because they were common sense and not spouted from a ideological perspective. For example, I'll give you one policy. So I want to move K-12 to K-14. Because right now we're celebrating about 3.6 million seniors graduate every year, and we're celebrating them basically for nothing. If you graduate high school, you're no more employable than someone who didn't even go to high school. You can go out there and get a minimum wage job somewhere, and that's all you're worth. That's it. And so I lived in Berlin for 6 months playing in NFL Europe, and they have a university track and a vocation track. When you go to ninth grade, you're either after ninth grade, you're gonna either go, I'm going to university, or I'm gonna do a shop type of trade vocation. And I thought, okay, that's clever, I like that. So K-14 would be, we can still get it done the same amount of time. We go to year-round school, so we're not adding the years, but every kid finishes with an associate's degree or with some type of vocation or some type of license, but some type of skill. Something that allows you to have a passport in the real world to go get a real job with a meaningful wage and not just some service retail minimum wage job. Or you have an AA, which then will help you be able to only take debt for 2 more years of college. It'll free up some of the classrooms where kids now having to graduate in 5.5, 6 years. So there's a lot of benefits from it. So I want to move from that. It costs about $3 billion. We spend $50 billion a year in foreign aid. So I'd pull $3 billion out of foreign aid and put that towards graduating everyone from basically community college with an associate's degree or with a vocation. And now we're dumping 3.6 million skilled people into the workforce versus unskilled labor that's going to only be able to work for a minimum wage. We're celebrating things that are not very valuable.
First of all, I'm not Republican, but I like that policy that you just mentioned is because it starts taking stuff out of ideologies.
Yep.
Let's talk about things that work.
Yep, solutions.
That's one. And then second, I'm going to click through your video and you speaking up there that you're a visionary. So when you talk to entrepreneurs and people that you mentor, like how important is keeping that vision, having that big vision of like what you're looking to strive for, and how do you like keep that in mind when it comes to making sure that you have that strategic plan to actually accomplish what you want?
It's a simultaneous thing of thinking big and acting small. And I think everyone on the stage that you're going to see, they've all had to do this. They've all came out of high school and didn't know how to do it. Maybe they did have parents that were wealthy or parents that understood how to think strategically and parents that had resources and networks you can plug them to. I mean, if I was Mark's kid, I'd have been really successful a long time ago. So it took me a little bit longer route to get there. Matt, where are you at? Somewhere around here. But yeah, so you have to think big and act small at the same time, right? You're building out the plan, and then you're also at the same time, like Diane said, looking at that 3-month plan. Like, what are we going to do over the next 3 months to either start building the plan or research to build the plan? You cannot learn enough in your own life to be successful at anything that you do. You're going to have to learn from other people, whether that's on the job learning, whether that's reading through books, whether that's YouTube. It's some combination of all these things and finding mentors to do that. And at the same time, once you drill in on that idea, what Diane said about writing something that says this is what you're going to celebrate about my company, and then start putting together the bite sizes that you have to execute on a 3-month basis, there's really no shortcut to it. And you just start putting pencil to paper, and you just keep whittling through it until you have the right idea. And then you add on top of it what I said. The most important thing is underwriting. And if I could teach each of you one valuable lesson before you leave here, listen to this. I learned this when I first jumped up into real estate development. My business partner's father was really wealthy, had a private plane, lived in a $10 million house. I'll never forget one day we were in the office and he said, Damon, credit is more important than cash. I was like, okay, I'd like to have a lot of cash, but credit is more important than cash. And he just started explaining to me, if you want to buy a house, you need credit. You got to have a down payment, but you also have to have credit. If you want to start a business and get a loan from a bank, you need credit. If you want to get a student loan, you need credit. If you want to go out and rent a place, you need credit. If you want to go out and buy a car, you need credit. Credit is more important than cash in the United States. That's a very valuable lesson. Any more questions? Far back. Yep.
Generational wealth.
How do you build generational wealth?
Thanks.
That's a great question. How do you build generational wealth? It's first of all gaining wealth. and then having the opportunity to start leaving that behind. You have to know what builds wealth, right? Appreciating assets. You know, we need more people in the home ownership. I wish I had time to talk about a policy to do that, helping people to go into lease to own opportunities. But you build a home, and that's really the first place that people started to build wealth in the United States. You look at post-World War II, how the middle class was built, home ownership flew out. And what happens when you have home ownership? Every part of your payment now is going to your benefit. The interest piece, you get to write off against your income. The principal piece is going in to pay down the loan principal, so it's in the house. So after making 5 years worth of payments, you've written off a certain amount of your income based on the interest portion. You have a certain amount of principal that you paid down that you can still borrow out. And a lot of people use what's called HELOC, home equity lines of credit, to fund their first business, to pay for their children to go to college. And then you manage that well, and then maybe you get an insurance policy for life insurance, right? And now you got a job that has a 401k or a job with a pension. By the way, I would tell you, get a government job, because if you work at a pension, you can work and get 70-80% of your highest salary. Military and public officials in government can do that. So you start to figure out how to be resourceful around a house. How do you start a business? How do you get an insurance policy? Then you set up a trust, and then you're in a position where you can leave your children at a minimum the house and land that you own that's probably got X number of $100,000 of equity that's in it, an insurance policy for them to be able to collect on once you pass on. And the problem is that a lot of blacks, Latinos, a lot of people in middle class America and working class America don't understand that, don't have access to that, don't have any relationships with people who've ever done that, and can't even see it. And that's what I was focused on. I watched you guys listen to these guys. I was like, man, they're talking at such a high level, and I understand everything they're saying, but you guys have less strategic experience of owning businesses to get a lot of things they were saying. So I was trying to bridge that gap today. You have to learn how to think strategically, and that's how to build wealth over time. Start with owning a home. That's an appreciating asset. That's the #1 driver of wealth in the United States over the last probably 5-6 decades, and something we also got to try to invest in the future.
All right, we're going to thank
you guys.